Have you heard of the Battle of Athens? It was election day. It was 1946. This was the first election that returning veterans were allowed to vote. There were a lot of veterans from a small town in Tennessee, Athens, and they'd gone away. And while they were away, they didn't know this, but their town had fallen under serious corruption. The Memphis party bosses had taken over the town using a vote grab following FDR's coattails. There was a sheriff who was elected who was harassing, fining, arresting even the former soldiers. He was rigging elections, he was skimming money, he was bootlegging. It was basically the Dukes of Hazzard. The veterans came home and they said, if democracy was good enough to put on the Germans and the Japanese, it's good enough for McMinn County too. There were 3,000 veterans in the county. That's about 10% of the county's population and a huge percentage of the voters. Now, according to the book McMinn County that was published by Memphis State University Press in 1984, they said manipulation of the poll tax and the counting of the votes were the primary methods, but it was common for voters from the dead to appear in McMinn elections. Basically, they were cheating. It was election fraud. The GIs wouldn't have any of it. They fielded their own slate of candidates for the August 1946 election. The party machinery did its job. What they responded with is they pre-filled out ballots and they kept them on the ready in the jail. When the votes were being counted, the GIs realized that they were starting to put fake votes in, and so they busted open the armory, took out weapons, surrounded the jail, and there was an armed standoff and lots of shooting. Finally, one of the GIs grabbed a stick of dynamite and tossed it against the jail. When the smoke cleared, the sheriff and his deputies came out, surrendered, and they pulled the ballot box out for all the town to see, and they did a fair and full count. The GIs won that election in a landslide, and it ended political corruption in that town for the time being, at least. What's the lesson from the Battle of Athens? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The sheriff and the party bosses were waging an economic war on a small Tennessee town. The returning vets saw the despotism of Hitler and Mussolini happening in their own hometown, and they're not going to stand for it. The economic weapon here was election fraud. Sadly, election fraud did not end in 1946. It's going on today, and the methods have become a lot more sophisticated. It was all about the money then, and it's all about your money now. Join me in the economic war room as we discuss election fraud and what you should do about it. There's a famous quote that many people attribute to Ben Franklin. Supposedly, he said, when the people find they can vote themselves money out of the public treasury, that will herald the end of the republic. Looking at recent elections, we may already be there, but worse than an ignorant or a greedy electorate, there's another reality. Whoever controls the ballot box controls your money. You don't have to convince people. You just cheat your way to victory, and then you take the people's money. Once in power, never give it up. This is modern economic warfare. It's what happened in Nazi Germany and most recently in Venezuela. It started here, and it's got to stop. There are two types of election fraud we'll talk about. One of them is dirty tricks, and the second is outright electoral theft. We're going to walk through examples. Bad, which are the problems, and we'll then have good, which is our battle plan and how we address it, and then we'll wrap up with something beautiful, something that can happen if we all do our part. Today's episode will focus on election dirty tricks. Our next episode will feature outright election theft. Every election has dirty tricks by both sides. This isn't Republicans or Democrats. Both sides do them. But these aren't only unfair to those who are voting, they're unfair to all of us. Imagine if there's cheating in a Minnesota Senate race. Even if you don't live in Minnesota, it's going to impact. It might determine who the next Supreme Court nominee is. It might determine whether or not we have a bill passed or stopped by a filibuster. What happens in Minnesota, what happens in Oregon, what happens in Arizona and Massachusetts, that impacts you. because the senators all vote together, or the congressmen. Let me give you some examples of dirty tricks. Telling people the wrong date for an election, or sending voters to the wrong polling place, or manipulating Google search results, or hacking websites, or faking Facebook, or giving out bad voter guides. The first example is one where the Republicans were caught. This is from Axios. It says, over the weekend, Twitter suspended 1,500 fake accounts a pro-Trump group created to mock liberals because the accounts had been spreading false information about Election Day, saying that Election Day is November 7th, when in fact it is Tuesday, November 6th. Well, that's a dirty trick. It's not right. It did happen, and the conservatives were guilty. But it's not just the conservatives. Google and big tech have been manipulating voters, and they can shift millions of votes in any direction they want to. Now, I'm going to quote from USA Today. This is an editorial written by Robert Epstein. Now, if you don't know who Robert Epstein is, he's a senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. He's the former editor-in-chief of Psychology Today, and he's the author of 15 books. What he says is, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not even a conservative, but I love America and democracy, and I defend truth when I see it. And President Donald Trump is not only justified in expressing misgivings about Google and other tech companies, he seems to have no idea just how big a threat Google and the gang pose to both democracy and human autonomy. In an article in the Epoch Times, I've detailed 10 different methods big tech companies can use to shift millions of votes in the midterm election without anyone knowing they're doing so and without leaving a paper trail for the authorities to trace. Upwards of 12 million votes by my calculations. These powerful new means of manipulation make fake news stories and targeted ads, sources of influence that are both competitive and visible, look like kid stuff. He went on and said, is there any actual evidence of favoritism in Google's search engine? Well, the European Union certainly thinks so, having fined Google $2.7 billion last year for biased search results. In the months leading up to the 2016 election here in the U.S., and this is Robert Epstein still speaking, he says, I led a team that used objective methods to preserve 13,207 online election-related and the 98,044 web pages to which the search results linked. These data showed that Google's results favored Hillary Clinton, whom I supported, he says, in all 10 positions on the first page of search results, enough perhaps to have shifted 2 or 3 million votes in her direction over time. He concludes by saying, Google can turn a 50-50 split among undecided voters into an astonishing 90-10 split. So Google can manipulate the electorate. Would they do it? What's their predilection? What would they lean towards? We know that. Wall Street Journal did an expose September 20th, 2018. Google workers were discussing tweaking search function to counter President Trump. They said days after the Trump administration instituted a controversial travel ban, Google employees discussed ways they might be able to tweak the company's search-related functions to show users how to contribute to pro-immigration organizations, contact lawmakers and government agencies, according to internal emails. Yes, Google is biased, and yes, they have the ability to move the electorate. We know from Robert Epstein that Google was active in the last election, and they could have moved 2 or 3 million votes. Not just Google. Facebook is a potential other risk. And we have recent admissions from Democrats that, yeah, they put up fake Facebook pages. You know, the things the Democrats said the Russians did? The Democrats were actually putting up fake pages on Facebook to suppress GOP turnout in midterm elections. From Daily Caller, it says the operatives were funded by left-wing technology billionaire Reid Hoffman, who previously funded a false flag effort in the 2017 Alabama special election. These guys are doing dirty tricks. Then, of course, there's always voter intimidation. Do you remember in the 2008 election where there were 3 thugs standing outside a polling place and they were carrying bats and nightsticks at the entrance? And here's a quote. One of them brandished a nightstick at the entrance and pointed it at voters and made racial threats. One yelled, You're about to be ruled by the black man, cracker. That kind of voter intimidation is a dirty trick. It's wrong. Unfortunately, the Justice Department did not properly pursue that problem. So voter intimidation is another type of dirty tricks. Beyond that, one you may have never heard of, but perhaps the most insidious of the last campaign, is something that my friend John Graves of Vision America shares. He was recently in the economic war room, and I want you to hear his story. John.
Yes.
Welcome to the economic war room.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, could you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes. Vision America is a ministry to pastors and people of faith to engage them in the culture, to register, to vote, to run for office, and to get engaged.
Okay, so it's a ministry.
That's right.
All right, nonprofit?
Yep. It's nonprofit. Yes, we're an association of churches, so it's very similar to a church or any association of denominational churches. We serve churches all over the country.
But you work in the political realm.
We do political, we do lobbying sometimes, we do anything that impacts the culture, but a lot of ours is trying to get good people to govern us is one of our focuses.
Okay, so you're doing all this and you produce voter guides.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right. We do nonpartisan church-approved voter guides, and we do two things. We either have pastors who we've educated and are willing to hand them out to their congregation in each election cycle, or we micro-target them to people who don't normally vote or who are longing for good education. And so we found that that's one of the most impactful things. 75% of the people in the last presidential election, the number one thing they relied on was a nonpartisan voter guide. And the reason is they don't trust the media, they don't trust the PACs, they don't trust the parties, but they trust their friends, they trust their pastor, they trust good education, good information, and we just footnote the facts and give them the facts.
Well, there's a whole lot of work that goes into that. You have to contact every candidate, you have to research the issues,
Yes.
you have to put all this together, you have to meet and match with the churches to make sure it's what the pastors feel comfortable with. So you put a lot of work in.
Enormous,
now,
yes.
you say that people, it impacts them, but does it really, I mean, how much good does it do?
It's incredible. We started several years ago empirically measuring what happens when a pastor begins to educate his people to be registered, because half the people in most churches aren't even registered, so they can't vote even if they wanted to or the pastor asked them to. But then we also get them to turn out and vote. And so half the people that are registered, that's part of the reason the country's in the mess it's in, because so few people are engaged in the political process because it's messy or because they're having to hold their nose and pick the lesser of two evils. And so we empirically measure a drastic impact. Our measurements in this last election cycle were a 24% increase when the pastors engage and do what we ask them to do.
Right, but a 24% increase on a very small base. How does that translate into actual election results?
It's massive. If you'll remember this last presidential election, Wisconsin was 0.2%. Michigan and Pennsylvania were 0.7%. Florida was 1.2%. It was actually, I think, 0.2% in Florida this 2018 election cycle. And so we do these in mega churches and small churches. We were in front of over 5,000 pastors and had 5 million voter guides go out in this last election cycle.
Wow.
We're hoping to double or triple that this time.
And in Florida, there were fairly narrow elections for governor,
Incredible.
for senator. So what was the margin and how much impact did you have?
Good question. So the governor's election was slightly over 30,000 votes in Florida. The Senate election for Rick Scott was 10,033 votes.
So the margin of victory for Rick Scott was 10,000?
10,000 votes out of millions. Okay. We literally micro-targeted over 300,000 of our voter guides to social conservatives across Florida, and we had over 1 million paper voter guides handed out in thousands of churches across the state.
So you're talking 1.3 million voters were impacted,
right.
And 10,000 votes made the difference.
Yeah, we had some of the leaders in that state call us election night, actually, and then shortly after that and said, had we not done this with them, that those elections would not have been won.
Which, of course, that's why you're going to tell the story that you're going to tell,
yes.
and that's why the bad guys have targeted you.
Exactly.
Tell us that story.
Yeah, so what happened is we do these in churches all over. We make it free. We make it available. We just want to make sure that it's a biblical-based pastor who's willing to do this, and we hand them out, and then we micro-target to the people. Sometimes their pastors aren't willing yet, and we got a call. And it was a larger church, and this was in the Texas Senate election with Ted Cruz and Beto. And a husband went out to get the car of one door of the church. The wife went to go with the kids and meet him in the front and went out another door. She got one voter guide, he got another one.
So you're handing them out at the doors.
That's right.
Okay.
And so he picks up a good one, she picks up the bad one. They get to the car and go and start comparing them, sitting in the car going, something's wrong.
What do you mean a good one and a bad one?
Okay, so our voter guide usually covers 10 to 12 issues, and we just footnote where is the candidate on the Supreme Court, on life, on marriage, on poverty, on prison reform, on economic issues, on the, those
and
kind
you're
of things.
comparing Beto O'Rourke with Senator Ted Cruz. Okay.
So she gets her voter guide, and it says that Ted Cruz, who everybody knows is pro-life, whether you like him or not, that's his voting record, and that's his facts. It said he was not pro-life. He was against pro-life because he didn't vote for Obamacare, which gives people access to health care, therefore he's against it. They call the pastor calls us, and we began the process we're still in now of an active investigation looking at, because clearly it's civil, it's violations of copyright, it's fraud, it's criminal election fraud to represent that you're with someone. And so we began that whole process.
So your attorney, and in your opinion, they committed not just one, but a series of serious crimes.
Local, state, and possibly federal. We're looking at that right now.
In an attempt to manipulate the election.
Exactly.
Because they know voter guides work.
That's right.
And so they're trying to either steal your ability to put them out or actually hijack it.
And deceive people. And so they literally came inside the house of God to deceive the people of God during early voting, during an election when these are being handed out. And we don't know how many thousands of people got the wrong information and didn't have a spouse there to say, wait a minute, I got a different voter guide.
Right.
And so they brought them into the church. It was a couple. They were pretty professional. So they parked out in each one of the locations. We know of at least 3 different cities this happened in, and they parked out where we couldn't get the license plates of the cars, but then we have them on surveillance.
You have
Yes.
video evidence of them. We pulled it up here.
Yep.
So tell us about a little.
So this is 3 different locations. They would literally change clothes in between different services. It's the same couple. We now have a hard ID on one of these 2, and we're in the process of finding the hard ID on the second one. But clearly they were spent a lot of time and money and effort to do this. We don't know how widespread it is all over the nation, but we know for sure that this is
3 cities in Texas.
That's right, 3 cities in Texas. And as you know, that election, was pretty narrow. It wasn't as close as Florida, but it was pretty narrow. And so we're trying to determine exactly who was behind this.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have been caught except for the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it went on for a couple of church services without us knowing about it, and we don't know where we don't know.
So were they just took a stack out and put a new stack
Correct.
back?
Yeah, you'll see here pictures with the bags, the purses that they were carrying in, or just handfuls of them. They brought stacks of these, hundreds in some cases, thousands in others, where they were at the tables at the back of the church to hand them out, and they literally just stuck them there and commingled them. But they had our logo. Our website looked just like ours, but what they did on the back is they took the footnotes off. We footnote every position. So if it's the presidential and Hillary says, yes, I think it's fine to kill a baby all the way till the day of birth and in the debate, then we just cite that fact. It's just a fact. She's not opposed to us citing that fact. That's her position.
Yeah, right.
And so what they did
Beto is proudly pro-choice.
That's right. Yeah.
That's his language, but he's very proud of it.
Exactly. And he was fine with taking a baby's life all the way until birth.
Sure.
And so whoever this was, and we now know some good information on that, they clearly knew the talking points of the Beto campaign and intended to deceive people. So it's not just fraud, it's not just civil, it's actually election crime in the state of Texas, yeah.
Okay, so that's the problem.
Yep.
What do we do about it?
So to me, you've always heard the adage, the best defense is a good offense. So we know they're going to cheat. We know they're going to deceive. It's telling to me that that's what they've got to do to try to win elections. They can't just give their own information to the people who support that information. They've got to deceive people who don't believe that. And so
how do we counter it?
What we want to do is get the word out that there's deceit to be careful of, but we also want to increase the reach. Even 5 million voter guides is a small reach compared to what we could do. So we're talking to a lot of people and hope to spread that. We've identified the 17 states in 2020 that the current President, Trump, either won or lost by single digits. We believe those will be the top focuses, and there's about 7 Senate and 7 governor races also of states that will be, the most important states, we believe, this next election
So you
cycle.
want to get more voter guides, more information.
Exactly.
The other side has admitted they worked or they wouldn't have attacked them.
Exactly.
And you want to get that, and you want to put them in the most influential places
That's
possible.
right. And we spend a ton of work, and we empirically measure both the churches. We're creating a national database of churches that are like-minded, but also people who are a little disillusioned with the mess in the political world, and we're trying to encourage them to be salt and light and influence this, because whoever we elect is who governs us, and that's what decides all of our laws on economic issues, moral issues, and so forth. So,
Well, thank you very much, John. Thanks for telling your story.
thanks for having me.
We've talked about the bad, the dirty tricks that people are doing to manipulate the elections. Let's talk about the good. What can we do about this? Well, the first thing we can do is we can access good information. We've got to get a hold of the voters' guides from people like Vision America or iVoters Guide, and we've got to be vigilant in getting proper information. We can't just take Facebook or Google's word for it. Second thing we need to do is we need to get active and involved. You're responsible for educating your neighbors. Use emails, phone calls, block walk, yard signs. Get the message out. We have to combat the dirty tricks with a serious grassroots effort. The Tea Party's made a huge difference in the 2010 election, but we've lost a lot of that energy and we need to get it back. Go to economicwarroom.com and access our battle plans. They'll give you a detailed guide of what we can do to help fight the dirty tricks. And the final thing, the most important thing we can do is we can pray. Ultimately, this is a spiritual battle. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land." We've got to get educated, we've got to get our churches educated, and we've got to get involved. Now, I want to close with a beautiful story. We know the bad, we know the good, what we can do about it. Here's the beautiful story. The returning GIs in Athens in 1946, they took over McMinn County politics. Right now, that county is solidly conservative. In fact, President Reagan visited Athens, Tennessee in 1985, and he spoke from the courthouse steps, something that wouldn't have been possible had those courageous veterans not stood up for freedom a generation earlier. Did you know that McMinn High School in Athens is now recognized in USA Today as a bronze medal winner in the national high school rankings? There's good news for this beautiful little Tennessee town. Now, in their time, the veterans did their part, and President Reagan certainly in his generation did his part. Now we're a generation later, and we're facing a new threat to our freedoms. It's up to us. If not us, who? If not now, when?